Okay, we can begin. Welcome to tonight's class, which is the fourth in this series on history, drama, politics as art. For those of you who saw the first three, we reviewed the current strategic situation and did two classes on Schiller's history of the 30 Years' War. And then last week, we presented the material on Schiller's dramatic presentation of the history of the 30 Years' War in the context of Lyndon LaRouche's idea of tragedy, particularly in reference to his famous article, Politics as Art. So tonight, we're have the great pleasure of being joined by Dan Leach, who's been a collaborator with Lyndon LaRouche for close to 50 years, if not 50 years. It's hard to
46.
say. 46 years, yeah. Okay. And Dan has a lot of experience to be able to present to us the material tonight, because he's been a dedicated political organizer, very effective one, as well as an expert in poetry and a quite good poet himself. He gave us a very good presentation several months ago on Keats and on poetry and why poetry was so important. So tonight he has something very important for us, which is something that LaRouche felt was very important subject, not only for himself, but also for basically all of civilization, and that's the story of Prometheus. And I'll let Dan explain to you why that's the case, but for at least the last 5,000 or 6,000 years, the story of Prometheus has been central to man's fight to create a form of society based on man's unique creative powers. And as Dan will explain, also played a very important role in the establishment of the United States as a self-governing constitutional republic. So it is very important for us today to call on the story of Prometheus to help guide us out of this crisis that we're in right now. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dan, and he'll begin the discussion, and then in the course of which we may have some back and forth between myself and Dan, and then we're going to open it up for questions, which I'm sure you will have many after you hear what he has to say. So welcome, Dan. Why don't you explain to us why Prometheus, if anybody knows who he is so important for us today.
All right. Thanks, Bruce. I should probably first say, just by way of disclaimer, that I am neither a historian or a classical scholar in any depth, but this idea, this myth of Prometheus is one of those ideas that have a role in the, you might say, in the psyche of cultures, most especially our culture, Western Judeo-Christian culture, and most especially that of the United States, which I hope to talk about a little bit later. These kinds of metaphorical ideas, or archetypes, if you will, have long fascinated me. They've often been the subject of poems by great poets, as we'll see a little bit later. And I believe that this one in particular, the story of Prometheus, is particularly important for the moment of history we're living in now. Because I'll say at the outset, I believe that this country was founded as a Promethean culture, a culture that was organized around the unique, as Bruce said, the unique creative capacities of the human mind, and government's duty to foster and promote that in its citizens as the unique source of wealth and all rights. So I'll just state that in the outset, hope to develop the idea and make that more clear. And I should also say that the only reason in which this even came to my attention at all was because of my lifelong association with Lyndon LaRouche. He was fascinated with the Prometheus story from a very early age. Bruce might want to talk about this a little bit later when we get into some of the examples, but because for him, the center point of Lyndon LaRouche's entire economics and his philosophy of science, his philosophy of human morality was based around this the unique quality that makes human beings human as opposed to animals, and which is really captured in the Prometheus myth. So without any further introduction, let me just get right into what we're actually talking about. What is the Prometheus myth for those who are not familiar with it, and perhaps some people who may have been familiar with it many years ago and haven't really thought about it in a long time? This is a very old story. No one knows exactly how old. We think that scholars think that as far back as Bruce said, maybe 5,000 years, ever since the start of civilization, there was something akin to the story of a god or a demigod or a titan. The stories differ from place to place, but an immortal being stole fire from Zeus, from the king of the gods, and gave it to mankind. There are stories like this, apparently, although I'm not, intimately familiar with them at all. In Indian culture, there's a fire god, a fire giver god. In Mesopotamian cultures, probably like the flood myth, there's probably one in every single culture, because whenever a culture began to discover its power over nature and began to develop civilization, began to invent things, began to express its innermost feelings in works of art, for example, it would naturally occur to members of that culture that this had to have come from someplace. It had to have that it has some celestial, heavenly origin, because it appears to be. It not just appears to be, it is so obviously different than anything any other creature possesses. That is the capacity for creativity. So the first time, however, that this that we know of this being written down, the Prometheus myth in particular, in any systematic way, or at least that has survived so that we can know it today, is the Greek poet Hesiod. And I'm going to focus on three different minds, three different poetic minds, and how they treated this, to show how not only how this has evolved, but to show I hope the importance of this for this kind of moment we're living in right now. So Hesiod lived in the 8th century BC, roughly contemporaneous with Homer, although a completely different kind of mind. And he, in his Theogony, wrote down the story of Prometheus, which is that Prometheus was a titan. I should say that another theme that seems to recur in virtually every culture that we study is the story of a war between the gods, or a war in which a new set of gods come in and overthrow a previous set of gods. In this case, in Greek culture, it was the Titans, ruled by Saturn, of which Prometheus was one of the Titans, the original gods. And the new set of gods come in. Now, I won't go into it, but is a significant body of evidence to suggest, and Lyndon LaRouche certainly believed this to be the case, that this actually described a real event that occurred in maybe as far back as 10,000 BC, that a superior culture came in, a transatlantic culture, and overthrew the littoral culture of the Mediterranean littoral, maybe 10,000 years ago, and that this was handed down as myth, as a new set of gods coming in and overthrowing a previous set of gods. But be that as it may, the myth is that the Titans were overthrown by the Olympian gods. Prometheus, being a Titan, though, and his name, by the way, Prometheus, means foresight, the ability to see into the future. This becomes very important later on when you see what the way that this is dealt with by the other two poets. But Prometheus helps Zeus overthrow the previous gods. And he's given a special place for doing this. Now, some of the myths have it that Prometheus actually created mankind by shaping little clay figurines, and then had, I believe it was Athena, breathed life into them. That sounds familiar. It's also a myth that recurs in many civilizations. In any case, there's Hesiod describes what is called the trick at Mecone, Mecone. Now, this is very important because what's being decided, Prometheus wants mankind to be able to prosper. He loves mankind because he either loves them just because they reflect this quality that the gods have, or they look like the gods because that's the way Prometheus fashioned them out of clay. But he wants them to be able to sacrifice in a way, because in all ancient civilizations, the gods have to be propitiated by human beings by sacrifice. Even the Jews, as you know, sacrificed a lamb or whatever. And so he puts two different sacrifices before Zeus that are going to henceforth be the way that human beings sacrifice. One is a bunch of bones and gristle wrapped in beautiful glistening fat, so it looks like a beautiful roast. The other one looks like a bunch of fur and ugly, exterior, but has the choice meat inside of it. And the story goes that Zeus chooses the one that looks better, and he's angry at being tricked, and decides to take it out on mankind. Now, in this version of the myth, mankind already had fire. Zeus takes it away from man, to punish man, and and that's when Prometheus steals the fire back from Zeus and gives it to mankind. In this version of the myth, Zeus is also so angry at mankind after and mankind having fire again, that he chains. He does two things. He chains. He has Prometheus chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains. Prometheus, being a god and being immortal, cannot die. He's being condemned to eternal torture, where every day a eagle comes and eats out his liver, and every night it grows back. So he has to go through this torture every day for thousands, for forever. And in retribution against mankind, Zeus sends Pandora. Everybody's heard of Pandora's box. In Hesiod, it's not a box; it's a jar. But she offers this as a gift to Prometheus's brother, Epimetheus, which means afterthought. Right? He's not looking forward. He symbolizes the god who doesn't look forward and makes wise decisions based on thinking about the future. He's looking backward. He stupidly accepts this gift from Pandora, opens it, and out comes every malady, sickness, death, war, every malady that mankind can possibly suffer comes out of this. And only too late does he put the lid back on the jar. And there's only one thing left in the jar: hope. So that kind of sets the stage for what Hesiod's really saying. By the way, in this version, Hesiod takes the editorial. You can tell by the way the language works that he's taking the position that Prometheus shouldn't have done this. It was dumb for him to have done this because he condemned mankind to eternal suffering with no hope, and condemned himself to eternal suffering, and that he basically deserved it because he disobeyed authority. He disobeyed the authority of Zeus, which upsets the order of the universe. So what is this telling? If you think about it, the idea being that had Prometheus, the trickster, which is how he characterizes Prometheus, had he not stolen the fire and tricked Zeus, mankind would be happy, dumb, subservient, no knowledge, no control over nature, because this is what fire represents. It represents not only control over nature, but Prometheus also gives to mankind counting, mathematics, agriculture, animal husbandry, every art and science, navigation, astronomy, all comes from Prometheus and is sort of accompanies the gift of fire. So what Hesiod is basically saying is that had not Prometheus done this, mankind would be happy, dumb and animal-like, and still living in caves and with no as you'll see when I read a bit of Aeschylus, but we'd be happy. Now this is the oligarchical view of what human beings should be, and the ancient Greek writers, especially Aeschylus, when he treats this 300 years later, was very well aware of the fact that what these myths tell you is what your worldview is. If you're saying that mankind would be happy but dumb had he not control over nature and was obedient to the gods, you're saying that we deserve no better than to live in an oligarchy where everything is done for us, our thinking is done for us. I mean, this is what today's oligarchs are trying to create today. A complete fascist world where there's no rights, there's no real knowledge, there's no real creativity. You can play like you have knowledge, but not the kind that will actually advance mankind. That's going to be, forbidden. So this is the oligarchical view, and I believe Hesiod was a spokesman for that oligarchical view. Now, jump ahead. That's the 8th century BC. And by the way, Homer, who is quite different, and we won't talk about Homer tonight unless somebody wants to, but he was, no one really knows the exact birth dates, but he was roughly contemporaneous with Hesiod. And he was decidedly not a pro-oligarch poet, because the Iliad and the Odyssey are all about human mental powers deciding the fate of man. So jump ahead to the 5th century BC. This is the height of Athens, of the power of Athens, which virtually ruled virtually the entirety of the Eastern Mediterranean, all the way to Italy. They had made tremendous advances in astronomy and science, in philosophy. This Aeschylus is writing a generation before Plato and Aristotle, but it's the height of the Athenian city-state. And at Athens, there were two things that were considered part of being a citizen. They had a democracy. Every male citizen voted. It was really the first time that we know of where such a form of society existed. And because they had gained such enormous power in military and in trade, and in the sciences, there was a sense among Athenians that there was something special about human beings. It was decidedly not an oligarchical society. It was the first awakening that we know of, at least that has come down to us, of this new spirit of man, of being civilized human beings. And in Athens, the two things that were considered most important to do as a citizen were to vote, and the other one was to attend the tragedy, the performance at festivals every year of the tragedies that were written by the greatest minds in Greece. And in the 5th century, right around the time of the Peloponnesian War, the greatest of these tragedians was Aeschylus. And he wrote a number of plays. Agamemnon is one of them. But the one which became very popular for many, many years after Aeschylus passed away and has come down to us is Prometheus Bound, in which he describes Prometheus is stealing fire from Zeus and being bound to the rock. And in this version, Zeus wants to utterly he doesn't want just mankind to be poor and stupid and animal. Like, he wants to actually wipe them out. He wants genocide. And Prometheus saves mankind by risking what he did, knowing, by the way, because his name means foresight and he has the gift of foresight, he knows what's going to happen to him. So it is a real act of sacrifice on behalf of man. Now, I'll just, if it's appropriate, I'll just read just a few lines to give you a flavor of what Aeschylus, the way he speaks. This is, of course, an English translation of Greek. I think it's a pretty good one. But Prometheus, he's chained to the rock at this section of Prometheus Bound. And Oceanus, who becomes important later when I talk about how Shelley, the poet Shelley, treated this, is like Neptune was in the ancient gods. Oceanus is the god of the sea. He's the daughter of the Oceanides, who are a group of demi-goddesses. And he comes to try to convince Prometheus that he's made a mistake and that he should recant and bow down to Zeus, and everything will be good again. If he just, and that he's being prideful, is what he implies. So Prometheus, in answer to these, and this isn't the only god who they like. Mercury comes down. Actually, Hermes in the Greek comes down and tries to threaten him. Oceanus tries the soft cop routine. We all love you. You made a big mistake. Just give up and give in, and everything will be fine again. And this is what Prometheus says to Oceanus, among other things. But he says, "Deem not that I am of stubbornness and pride am silent. With my thoughts, my heart is wrung, seeing myself with insult overborne. Yet to these upstart gods, who, if not I, made absolute partition of their sway. No more of that. It were a twice-told tale to you who know. The miseries of men I will recount to you, how mere babes before, with reason I endowed them, and with mind. And not in their disparagement I speak, but of my gifts to memorialize the love, who, firstly, seeing, knew not what they saw, and hearing did not hear. Confusedly passed their life days, lingeringly like shapes in dreams, without an aim, and neither sunward homes, brick woven, nor skill of carpentry they knew, but lived like small ants shaken with a breath, in sunless caves, a burrowing, hurried life. Of winter's coming, no sure sign had they, nor of the advent of the flowery spring. Of fruitful summer, none. So fared through each and took no thought till that the hidden lore of rising stars and setting I unveiled. I taught them number, first of sciences. I framed the written symbols into speech, art all recording, mother of the muse. I first put harness on dumb patient beasts, obedient to the yoke, and with their bodies that they might lighten men of heavy toil. I taught to draw the car and love the rain, horses, the crown of the luxury of wealth. And who but I invented the white-winged sea-roving chariot of the mariner? For mortals, such contrivances I found, but for myself, alas, no wit have I, whereby to rid me of my present pain. So that's Prometheus, and he defies, because he defies these attempts to try to get him to a camp, because he knows ultimately he's going to be freed. And what Aeschylus does is very interesting, because he introduces a new character into this myth, Io, who was a mortal girl who was raped by Zeus, who's always sexually harassing or raping mortal women. He's a really bad dude. He represents Zeus, that is, the absolutely arbitrary, willful power of oligarchs to do whatever they damn well please, and the cruelty. Anyway, in retribution, in jealousy, his wife intervenes, Hera, and he has her transformed into a cow. And she's condemned to wander the earth forever. And she comes to see Prometheus in her travels. And Prometheus forecasts that she will suffer for many, many more years, but ultimately she will be freed of her bondage of being a cow and will marry and have children, and that many generations, I think it's 10 generations or something like that, hence of this happening, which is still 1,000 years in the future, one of those progeny of hers will be the one that frees Prometheus. And the myth is that progeny is Heracles, otherwise known in Latin as Hercules, and he kills the eagle, frees Prometheus. And that's the story as Aeschylus gives it to us. So you get a sense of how these archetypes have to do with important principles. They explain things that have happened in history to the Greeks, but they also highlight certain principles. The evil of arbitrary power, the right to resist it, and to do so on behalf of humanity, the dignity and the nobility of human beings. It's all there, and Aeschylus is one of the great heroes of this. Now, there's a dispute over the other two plays, or even whether there were two or just one. The reports are that Aeschylus wrote at least one more play, probably two, one of which was called Prometheus Unbound, but they didn't survive. We don't have them today. The only one we have in translation is the Prometheus Bound. But from contemporaries who wrote about it and later writers who did see it performed or at the time or later on, were led to believe that Prometheus ultimately reconciles with Zeus, and I suppose they live happily ever after. We just don't know. However, Shelley, now, fast forward from, 450 BC to 18, probably around 1818, Percy Bysshe Shelley, who also Lyndon LaRouche greatly admired. He always would quote from Shelley's defense of poetry, where he said that at a great moment of political upheaval in humanity, there's an increased power to both receive and to impart profound ideas concerning man and nature. That's a paraphrase. But Shelley's poetry is some of the greatest ever written. And Shelley was also politically, we're talking about the first 2 decades of the 1800s. So this is just as America is in its infancy, but we were the only revolution against tyranny, against oligarchy, that actually succeeded in 2,000 years. And Benjamin Franklin, by the way, was known as the Prometheus of the 18th century, because what did he do? He harnessed fire from heaven, electricity, or at least demonstrated that that's what it was, and also was the most fruitful creative mind certainly in the New World, and was admired all over the world, and was greatly admired by Percy Shelley, who was not some starry-eyed romantic, as he's often portrayed. He was a passionate Republican political organizer, and was also a passionate supporter of scientific progress, which he was quite interested in and followed, particularly Ben Franklin's work, which he studied very intensely when he was at Oxford. Now, I don't want to go into a history of Percy Shelley, except to sort of set the tone for the environment in which he was operating. This is the early part of this is after he began to write right around 1815, 1816. 1815 was the Congress, the Congress of Vienna, which, after the defeat of Napoleon, the assembled oligarchs of Europe got together and tried to create basically a new world order, a system of globalization where any true national sovereignty would be suppressed in favor of complete power by the oligarchs. And being oligarchs, they realized that this had to not only be in the realm of political and economic control, but more importantly, and I think this goes directly to, the principles that we're talking about today that have to be revived, and what Lyndon LaRouche was all about. It's in the realm of culture, how people think, how they look at the world, and how they look at themselves. That's the most important thing to control. And so the Congress of Vienna wrote strict rules for what kind of music there would be throughout Europe, including England, what kind of art was going to be promoted, what kind of poetry was going to be promoted. It was really an attempt at a complete dictatorship in the world, in the realm of ideas. And so when Shelley was coming up in the early, he was born in 1797, I believe. So when he was a young student at Oxford, it was you just didn't attack the Church of England or the state. In fact, one of his friends, Leigh Hunt, who also was the person I talked about before, who promoted Keats. Leigh Hunt had been imprisoned for making fun of the Prince Regent, I believe it was, in his literary magazine, and had to go to prison for it. So when Shelley emerged on the scene, his first act was to write something. And this will go to my one of my main theses here. He got kicked out of Oxford for writing a piece called on the necessity of atheism. Now, I believe that Shelley was no real atheist. who are people who believe that there is no such thing as natural law. Everything is chance. Everything is statistics. We are meaningless in the universe. You all know the kind of thinking, people like Professor Dawkins, and then people like that. Shelley was passionately committed to this sacred quality in human beings that religion identifies as the soul, but he was opposed to organized religion because of the way that it was used in England at the time to suppress freedom, the Church of England. So that being said, Shelley had to leave England because of his political activities. He ends up in Italy. And just to give you very quickly a sense of the intellectual environment at the time, the Prometheus story was very popular among the Romantic poets, which was being romanticism was being promoted by the oligarchy at the time, which is the idea of expression of just your personal feelings, whatever they are arbitrarily, is all that's important. I'm not really giving much of an adequate definition of it, but that's certainly one of its characteristics. So you had many people, and there were many people who were in revolt against the governments of Europe at the time. And so this idea of Prometheus defying the gods, right? Defying authority, defying arbitrary authority was very popular amongst people who were, opposed to this system of dictatorship that you had in Europe at the time. So, Lord Byron, who Shelley befriended and tried to get on the right track, he wrote a Prometheus poem. Goethe wrote one a little bit later. Bruce is probably going to mention this later. We can talk about that. And Shelley's wife, Mary, took up the Prometheus theme in a different kind of a way, which I don't want to get into really, but the pitfalls of human creativity in her famous Frankenstein, which was subtitled Modern Prometheus. So this was a theme that was kind of out there. Now, Shelley moves to Italy, and it was in 1819, if I'm not mistaken, that he, looking back at the terrible situation in England, where there had just been the Peterloo massacre, where a group of workers and ordinary poor people gathered to try to petition the British government for the right for voting rights, and they were attacked and cut down in great numbers by the army, just massacred them. Shelley was just, he realized that if you were going to have a revolution, which was obviously necessary against this system of oligarchy, it couldn't just be on the basis of revolt itself. And this theme of Prometheus became very interesting to him. And he did, I can tell you, he says right in his introduction to it that the idea that Prometheus, the champion of mankind, would reconcile with the oppressor of mankind was just, he could not countenance this idea. So he set about to write a Prometheus Unbound of his own, not having the original, in which something different would happen. So that's what we're going to look at as briefly as possible, because I believe what he does with this is very, very special. In Shelley's version of it, the first thing that happens in Shelley's Prometheus Unbound is that Prometheus, who's chained to the rock and being tortured every night, he talks about that, he calls upon his mother, the earth, that's his mother, her spirit, to appear to him. Now, in this version, Prometheus also has the capability to call up the spirit of anything, not the physical thing, but you might say the soul or the spirit of everything from the earth to even to every person, every natural thing in the world and even the gods. And he asked Earth to recite to him the curse that he hurled upon Zeus when Zeus chained him to the rock. He uttered a curse. And so she does. And he basically says, I take it back. I don't want my soul to be burdened by this anger anymore. And he calls up the spirit of Zeus, of Jupiter. He is the same. It's the Roman name for Zeus. He has Zeus utter the curse, and he has the spirit of Zeus utter the curse, and then he takes it back. So that's significant right off the bat. Something different is there's been some kind of a change in Prometheus. Now, he also introduces another character, Asia, who's one of the Oceanides, daughters of Ocean. She is a goddess. Her sister is Panthea, who appear in the little section of dialogue that I have here. Asia and Prometheus are lovers. And Asia has been suffering, centuries and centuries while Prometheus has been chained to this rock. And through much, in many lines of just soaring, beautiful poetry, you see that Asia's love of Prometheus is not just ordinary love. It's because she loves the fact that he loves humanity and was willing to make this sacrifice for humanity. That's the thing. And she shares that love of humanity and is suffering because of what humankind is suffering because of what Zeus did. So I'll long story short, what happens in this is that she decides to go and do something about this. And she and her sister Panthea go to see Demogorgon. Now, it's kind of hard to figure out who and what Demogorgon is, but I believe he represents natural law, the primal power that underlies the universe, the force of destiny, that which no arbitrary authority can overrule. And he's in a dark cave deep down in the earth. And there's a whole, many people kind of give up on Prometheus Unbound because Shelley goes to great lengths to describe every nymph and every faun and every echo from the forest on their way to go see Demogorgon. It's a beautiful piece of poetry, but I want to get to what I think is the crux of the matter. Yeah, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll just read a little bit of it till we get to the important part of it. Panthea and Asia, they get there. Asia says, the veil has fallen. And Panthea says, I see a mighty darkness filling the seat of power, and rays of gloom dart round as light from the meridian sun. Ungazed upon and shapeless, neither limb nor form nor outline, yet we feel it is a living spirit. Demogorgon, and I wish I had a voice like James Earl Jones or something, but he, in a deep voice, says, ask what thou wouldst know. Asia says, what canst thou tell? Demogorgon, all things thou darest demand. Asia says, who made the living world? Demogorgon, God. Who made all that it contains? Thought, passion, reason, imagination. Demogorgon, God, Almighty God. Asia, who made that sense which, when the winds of spring in rarest visitation, or the voice of one beloved heard in youth alone, fills the faint eyes with falling tears which dim the radiant looks of unbewailing flowers, and leaves this peopled earth a solitude when it returns no more? Merciful God, says Demogorgon. And she says, And who made terror and madness, crime, remorse, which from the links of the great chain of things to every thought within the mind of man sway and drag heavily, and each one reels under the load towards the pit of death. Abandoned hope and love that turns to hate, and self-contempt, bitterer to drink than blood. Pain, whose unheeded and familiar speech is howling and keen shrieks day after day, and hell, and the sharp fear of hell. And scroll down. Demogorgon says, he reigns. She says, utter his name. A world pining in pain asks but his name. Curses shall drag him down. She meaning the cause of suffering of mankind, which Demogorgon did not say is God. Asia says, I feel it. I know it. Who? He reigns, he says. Who reigns? There was the heaven and the earth first, and light and love. And she goes into this long description of what's happened over the course of the creation of the world and the creation of mankind, and then the leading up to the fall of to the punishment of Prometheus. So you want to scroll. For time reasons, I won't go through it. It's very beautiful, as you can tell just by looking at it a little bit. And I'll just skip to the end here. It says, man looks on his creation like a god and sees that it is glorious, drives him on, the wreck of his own will, the scorn of earth, the outcast, the abandoned, the alone. Not Jove. Well, yet his frown shook heaven. Aye, his adversary, when his adversary from adamantine chains cursed him, he trembled like a slave. That is, Jove, Zeus, trembled like a slave when Prometheus cursed him, knowing that he would eventually prevail. Declare who is his master. Is he too a slave? That is Zeus. Demogorgon. All spirits are enslaved which serve things evil. Thou knowest if Jupiter be such or no. Asia. Who callest thou God? Demogorgon. I spoke, but as ye speak, for Jove is the supreme of living things. And who is the master of the slave? Says Asia. And Demogorgon says, if the abysm could vomit forth its secrets, but a voice is wanting, the deep truth is imageless. For what would it avail to bid thee gaze on the revolving world? What to bid speak fate, time, occasion, chance, and change? To these all things are subject, but eternal love. Asia says, so much I asked before, and my heart, scroll on, my heart gave the response thou hast given. And of such truths, each to itself must be the oracle. One more demand, and do thou answer me as mine own soul would answer, did it know that which I ask. Prometheus shall rise henceforth the son of this rejoicing world. When shall the destined hour arrive? Demogorgon says, behold. And what happened, you can take that off now. What happens now is that a winged chariot comes down, from the sky. It's one of the hours. Every hour has a spirit in this play, and this one is special because they get in the winged car or chariot, Demogorgon, Asia, and Panthea, and they fly up to Mount Olympus. And Demogorgon gets out, and it doesn't take very long. He basically tells Zeus, who knows what's going to happen at this point, tells him, "You're finished, pal." And Zeus basically falls out of heaven and goes into, it falls all the way down into the river of Tartarus or wherever. He falls into oblivion, I think is the way that Shelley describes it. He's finished, he's gone. His power is gone. And the rest of the play is the reunifying of Asia and Prometheus, and they're going out into the world and introducing a new golden age of mankind, of creative, happy development of civilization, and free of this tyranny of the gods of Olympus. Now, I could say a lot more, but this is, I think, and some may say that the way in which Shelley accomplishes it is akin to a deus ex machina. That's when a play has some artificial device come in and solve things rather than it working out through the development of the drama. You could say that the fall of Zeus is a deus ex machina, although it's a deus ex world. It's God. The God is gone. But in any case, what is significant about this is that what actually accomplishes the result is Asia, who loves mankind and loves Prometheus because he shares this love of mankind and was willing to sacrifice everything for it, goes to the power, it forces the underlying natural law of destiny in the universe to admit that love is a more powerful force than anything else. That's what happens. And that produces the downfall of Zeus. So what Shelley's giving us here is, I think, believe very. He what he's done is he's poetically and dramatically demonstrated at once both his religion, I think, because Shelley believed very strongly that power of love is what God is, and anything we do, as he has Demogorgon say, to try to define it or put it in categories or understand it with our limited sensory bound mental processes, turn it into something less than it is. That the manifestation of the divine power in the universe in us, the way we can know it, is this power of love, that it can not only move the world, but it literally can overthrow tyranny and free mankind. And this was his politics, Shelley's politics, and his religion. And I think this is something it was particularly important at the time for Shelley, because he was living in the shadow of the French Revolution. And I know Bruce talked about this. It was the case with Schiller as well. Schiller's a generation older than Shelley. He was already dead when Shelley, was a teenager. He was 7 years old when Shelley was 7 when Schiller wrote. But they were both extremely concerned with the failure of the French Revolution, which turned into a bloodbath and allowed the oligarchs to basically set up this tyranny, both with Napoleon and then later on with the Congress of Vienna. And they knew that if you did not have a revolution based on the right kind of principles, motivated by the right kind of thing, it will always turn into a disaster. And that's what they were, I believe, Shelley was committed to the same idea as Schiller was. And this play, Prometheus Unbound, is probably, well, it's in everything Shelley wrote in one way or another, but this is where I think he's the most explicit about it. And it's his mature, it's his most mature expression of it. So I hope, we can, and I can recite something from Shelley that I think is one of the most beautiful expressions of it. Maybe a little bit later we can have some discussion or questions or whatever. But I hope you had a sense of the way in which these three minds dealt with this. One, an oligarchical mindset. Another, an early expression of a Republican outlook. and then Shelley, who takes it a step further.